I envy the Cratchits. Notwithstanding Bob Cratchit's burdensome employer, they enjoyed a rather uncomplicated Christmas each year. Once he secured the day off from the squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, whom Bob was charitable enough to toast as the founder of the feast over his family's protests, even though Scrooge was anything but. Surrounded by their children, with a goose and a pudding on the table, Mr. and Mrs. Cratchit celebrated the quiet joys of the season with gratitude and hope. There were no in-laws to accommodate and appease, no overwhelming material expectations to satisfy beyond food and comfort, no demands to be a half dozen different places at the same time or juggled across a few days, and certainly no office party at Scrooge and Marley. The company of one another crowded together in their four-room home was enough. More than enough. Somewhere across town, Ebenezer Scrooge's nephew, Fred, and his wife entertained friends in their more luxurious home, waited upon by at least one servant. Fred was sensitive and reflective, aware of his social and material privilege in life, gracious and kindly towards those who did not share it, and thoroughly jovial and light-hearted in spirit. I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time. Forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. Some believe that Charles Dickens' novella, A Christmas Carol, which first appeared 180 years ago this month, had a singular influence on how we celebrate Christmas today. There is no doubt that it shaped our imagination of Christmas as a household or family celebration, extending far beyond the reach of churches, whether the pageantry of the liturgical traditions or the barrenness of the puritanical ones. It elevated charity and goodwill as core values of the season. And it revealed Dickens' sense of how Christmas should be observed, its essential meaning and spirit. At the time that he wrote A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens was a member of the little Portland Street Chapel in London, a Unitarian congregation. And it might seem a little arrogant on our part to somehow imagine that A Christmas Carol is in fact the beginning of Unitarians dominating the Christmas season. Today, as always, there is no shortage of people prepared to tell us how we ought to keep the season, how we should express our greetings to one another, and what we should call our trees, or what the true meaning of Christmas really is. I'll have none of the dogmatism of those who would impose their own narrow views on Christmas. For the Yuletide today is a marvelously eclectic celebration, and I'm content to weave together its varied strands as I see fit, learning and fashioning new ways from the old, evolving with the celebration, and enjoying the enjoyment of others as they add their unique twists and flavors to this ancient festival. I'm happy for others to do the same, for Christmas has no singular meaning, nor a singular way to celebrate it. Christmas is increasingly complicated for many. Can't even get the word out of my mouth. At many times in history and in some places, even today, it has been allowed to divide us from one another on religious and cultural grounds. So much so that many of our family members and neighbors speak of a specious war on Christmas, as if our differences in marking the midwinter are akin to a dispute over territory instead of simply matters of preference. How hypocritical to speak of a Prince of Peace and a war on Christmas in the same breath. It puts the hyper into hyperbole, and the strongest opinions often come from those who are the least knowledgeable and least reflective. Doesn't come from the Freds. It comes from the Ebenezers and others who would seek to dampen our spirits, to make Christmas a chore rather than a celebration. When I first heard the whimsical and imaginative song, The Christians and the Pagans by Dar Williams, I immediately fell in love with its light-hearted but profound message. It tells the story of Amber and her partner Jane, who after celebrating the solstice, presumably out in the woods, call up Amber's uncle on Christmas Eve because they need somewhere to stay. Despite her uncle's discouragement, they end up at dinner with his family where differences of belief are overcome, awkward questions are asked and answered, familial similarities are seen and appreciated, and estrangement, or at least indifference, points toward the hope of reconciliation. All without anyone needing to surrender who they are. In the concluding chorus, Dar Williams sings, "So the Christians and the pagans sat together at the table, finding faith and common ground the best that they were able, lighting trees in darkness, learning new ways from the old, and making sense of history and drawing warmth out of the cold." Puritan versus pagan, Catholic versus Protestant, Christian versus humanist, theist versus atheist, merchant versus consumer, in-laws versus friends, Scrooge versus Cratchit, old ways versus new, as if there has ever been a singular old way or a terrifying new one. It can all be a little tiresome. So I resonate with the notion of learning new ways from the old while making sense of history and drawing warmth out of the cold. Not long ago, I found a 75-year-old Yuletide meditation in Icelandic by Reverend Philip Peterson, who was minister of this congregation for 35 years. It was published on the front page of the newspaper Heimskringla in 1948, and it pretty much reflected the consensus among Unitarians at the time. And now in this midwinter season, we think once more about Christmas and once again sing the old Christmas carols, read the old sacred story, and lift our minds to the truth to which they point, even though many things in life seem to be in direct opposition to the spirit that created this story, Philip wrote. In spite of everything, in spite of all the contradictions of life, in spite of violence and the spirit of hostility that still prevails, in spite of suffering and difficulties of millions of people, we still celebrate Holy Christmas. And this holiday still has the same sanctifying effect on us that it has always had. He went on to trace the celebration of the season far back into the dim reaches of history, even before history. In ancient times, he noted, people rejoiced over the victory of light over darkness and sang praises and glory to the God of light. They rejoiced over brighter days and the vague certainty that happy and fruitful days lay ahead, although the cold still reigned in the world. In time, many of these ancient pagan practices were incorporated into Christianity, which associated them in creative ways with the birth of Jesus, and which added the hope of peace to the Yuletide, as recorded in the Gospel of Luke. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people." And channeling the voice of Linus in the Peanuts Christmas story, adding, "And suddenly there was the angel, a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, 'Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors.'" Here's the deal. You don't need to believe in God or a divine birth narrative to believe in Linus. And I continue to get just a little choke in the throat every time I watch all the seasonal favorites, every movie from A Christmas Carol to It's a Wonderful Life, with the animated ones in between. I continue to feel a catch in my throat when Linus gets to the words that all of us, or almost all of us, know by heart, not from reading our Bibles, but from watching TV. "The story is beautiful and exciting," Philip observed. "It spreads light over the world in a short time, and it is in human nature to want to worship the bright and beautiful and the noble. We want to implement everything that the spirit of Christmas represents, and that is why we celebrate Christmas and express our highest and most perfect desire for brotherly and sisterly love, for peace, and for the perfect human society where anyone can live together in peace and in truth." Just 3 years after the end of the Second World War, Philip believed that humanity had made progress, despite its setbacks and disturbances, that it had learned new things from the old, even as today, as we see a world at war as it has been every day of our lives, we strive to learn new things from the old, to embrace them and to realize them in a world of peace and decency. Philip saw Christmas Day as an experiment of sorts, the one day of the year when people might strive to live in full accordance with what was best and most beautiful, as sung by the angelic host 2 millennia earlier. to Philip and to Scrooge's nephew Fred. It didn't matter whether it was legend or history, as long as we dedicated ourselves to the highest and worked with heart and soul to achieve it. Every year, in the middle of winter, when the night is longest and the winter cold usually begins in earnest, this festival conveys to us humans the same message of joy that it has always brought since centuries ago. Just as with darkness and cold, even warfare and economic gloom could not overpower the message of joy and hope that the season conveys. And the strange thing about it is that it is the message that people want to listen to, even though they know that most of the stories related to it are derived from legends, both pagan and Christian. The mythic may be mythic, but it invites us to a better reality. And so the pagans and the Christians sat together at the table, finding hope and common ground the best that they were able, lighting trees in darkness, learning new ways from the old, and making sense of history and drawing warmth out from the cold.